How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm impressed you have a massive microphone in front of you. It's just like, I'm feeling very non-professional suddenly. I'm like here with my little like headphones and I'm like.
Well, as many times as I've tried to use headphones on recordings, I feel like it's always just annoying. So I at least have a microphone today. I've been just, going totally like naked with just my laptop and my laptop speakers and nothing else. Okay. Naked as in my computer was naked. It had no fancy bells and whistles attached until today.
And now it has bells and a whistle attached. It looks beautiful.
Hopefully, do I sound better? Everyone in the comments, let us know.
I mean, even I hear you a little bit different. Like it sounds a bit more like clean, but also a bit more like personal.
I love that. Am I in your ears?
Yeah.
Do I sound like I'm just whispering into your ears?
Yes. It sounds like you're whispering love words into my ears.
Sweet nothings.
Sweet nothings.
I don't know what's going on with me today. I'm talking about naked computers, whispering in Anne-Claire's ears.
It must be the engagement life speaking.
Well, anyway, welcome everyone. Season 2. We're so excited. This is our first episode of season 2. It's going to be so good. Anne-Claire, how are you feeling about it?
Awesome. I mean, I don't know if this, because I guess Talia's episode was like a little amuse-bouche, like a little taster of what's coming. Oh. But yeah, we've got a plan for the next entire season, aka the upcoming months. And I'm excited. I'm excited that the day has come that we are recording.
All the dance moves are back.
Yes. I mean, that's basically what everyone told us they're missing, right? Not what we're saying, but the way we're like the energy.
The content is secondary.
Duh.
To the dance moves.
Well, now your whistle and like sweet nothings might creep up to the top.
Anne-Claire. No, I'm just kidding. I've actually been watching a lot of scary movies, so I feel like I used a creepy voice for that, but
I thought you were going to say I watched a lot of ASMR and I'm thinking about doing some of that.
Jeez, no.
You've got the right microphone for that.
Oh, let's start some ASMR series.
That's going to be interesting.
Oh, man. Okay, so today's topic is drumroll. 4 tips to stop binge eating.
Yes, it is. Now, we have never addressed that like so far on here so directly, and it's been long overdue. So here we are starting. Who wants to go for the first tip? Are you going to share the first one or?
Well, yes, I can share the first one. And I want to give a little context here. Like, binge eating is complicated. It's multi-layered. There are physiological components. There are mental and emotional components. And so our first tip really speaks to and addresses the physiological binging. And so if you find that you're stuck in the binging cycle, it might be because you are not eating regularly and adequately enough. So our first tip is to make sure you eat regularly, which means at least 3 meals and multiple snacks a day, and enough, meaning that the portions you serve yourself are not restricted. You are actually satisfying yourself on a physical level. So you're satisfying that physical hunger. So what happens, which is really frustrating to binge eaters, is that they will find themselves binging so much at night to the point where they feel like their body has hijacked the situation, right? It's like they don't want to eat this much, but they can't really control their body at that point because it's just, I need food. And that is all rooted in lots of restriction prior to that event, right? So if you are restricting all day, that increases the likelihood that you're going to binge at night because your body actually thinks it's been going through a famine. And so once food is finally around, it's going to do everything in its power to make sure it's nourished to make up for the famine it just went through and survived. It's a really interesting response from the body. And I think it's pretty wise of the body, even though it's really tough to go through. It's rooted in like the need to survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I was actually about to say, like, it's really rooted in wisdom and survival. And when it comes to making sure that you eat regularly, you can kind of know rather easily, right? Am I actually eating 3 meals every day? Am I eating multiple snacks? When it comes to adequacy, please make sure that you maybe check with a qualified specialized dietitian that what you believe is adequate is actually adequate. So here I'm talking from experience as a coach. Can't tell, like, it's really like I can't measure it, but it's happened very regularly that I'll be talking to clients and they're like, yeah, like I'm eating normally. And then when we start scratching the surface as a team, we realize, well, that's actually a skewed understanding of what are your actual needs. And that's actually not adequate for you. Like you actually need it more. And so sometimes we're not conscious, right? We're not aware of the fact that what we're portioning ourselves isn't adequate. So I do want to sort of like throw in there that this can be, I mean, we don't know because we don't know everyone's case, but, you know, physically restricting can be a part of your pattern. And if you're checking with yourself based on what we're saying and you realize that you're not quite sure or that maybe it's like questionable, check with specialized professional. And in this case, I would say that person is probably a dietitian.
100%. I think you have such a good point. People with eating disorders have this distorted view sometimes of what a proper meal looks like, or like the quantity that a proper meal actually is, because diet culture has told them to restrict and limit and cut down. And so, you know, I think a dietitian is really helpful. And even if you have any questions, you know, sometimes you could even link up to apps like Recovery Record, where your dietitian can see what your plates are looking like. And they can actually get a sense of for real, how much you're eating, which I find the photo communication can be really helpful.
Throwing in there like one more little piece is that sometimes we might say, oh, what would you plate to someone else, like to a friend or something. Sometimes it can be helpful to look around you, sometimes really not. So make sure that you're also not sort of like letting your eating disorder get really sneaky there and be like, well, I'm looking at these person that I'm living with and that's what they're eating. And the reality is that society as a whole is quite disordered. I'm not saying everyone suffers from an eating disorder. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying that diet culture is widespread. And so sometimes referring to others can be a fantastic idea. Sometimes it can be an extremely slippery slope. So make sure that that's not sort of keeping you stuck either.
Yeah, that's such a good point too. Everyone around us, like we're kind of living in a diet culture world here. So the person you're living with, your roommate, your friend, they might even be a little disordered too. So, and they might have different food goals and food plans and needs.
Yeah. It's like, you know.
So like I find it kind of silly when people do compare and try to match what the person near them is doing, because you don't know what their needs are at that point. And your needs are very important right now because you're in recovery. So trusting your team and what they're like suggesting you eat is very, very important. So, all right, let's do tip 2.
So tip number 2 addresses the emotional side of things. So tip number 2 is make sure that you learn how to identify and feel your emotions. So that means not only naming them, but also knowing how to be with them, right? And that might include figuring out a new set of coping tools, coping skills, so that you can sort of navigate basically life, right? So what we know is that binges can be, like we just said, driven by this physiological restriction, this physical restriction, this lack of energy, like physical energy in our body, but it can also be driven by unmet emotional needs. And again, we're extremely wise creatures as humans, sometimes a bit less wise, but you know. Meg looked at me like, are you sure?
For yourself.
I've got opinions about this. But you know what I mean? Like, actually, like, emotional eating isn't fundamentally wrong, right? Soothing ourselves by eating is also a wise way to be with ourselves. However, this can sort of be used to an extreme that isn't helpful anymore, right? If we only cope with our emotions, if we only soothe ourselves through food and in quantities that qualify as a binge, which could be another conversation, honestly, but, then that's not really helpful, right? Like, we need to be equipped with other tools, and the tools start at the identification of your feelings. And then you've got to add, like, you know, the coping and the regulating and the being with, AKA feeling the feelings. What do you think?
I think that is such an important tip. And I find that a lot of times people are binging to numb or avoid certain emotions. And so building that emotional intelligence and like self-attunement is so important. And I always say start with just neutral observations about what you're experiencing leading up to the binge. Like, what are you feeling in your body? What are you experiencing in your thoughts? Like, gathering data and information. I'm like, think of yourself as like a detective trying to solve the binge mystery. It's like, I have to collect clues. Like, what are your triggers during the day? Like, maybe someone said something to you that left you feeling kind of icky and maybe hurt or betrayed. Like, these deep emotions might be simmering. You haven't transformed them. You haven't felt them. You haven't expressed them. It leads to a binge later, but being able to identify, what am I experiencing? What am I feeling? Being able to name that and transform that emotion so that you don't binge is so helpful. And I always bring it back to the emotion wheel that you and I know and love. It's like my favorite tool. We'll have Bob like put a little photo here of the emotion wheel, because you will see there's so many specific emotions that we were not made aware of or taught a lot about. And it's really cool when you can get into the specifics instead of just saying, I don't feel great. I feel bad today. It's like, what do you mean by that? Let's dive deeper.
I agree. I have no notes.
Anne-Claire was just like daydreaming about like,
I had like the feelings wheels, like, you know, twirling and turning. And I was like, yeah. Seriously though, like it is important not to forget that. I mean, she just said she had no nose and here she goes.
They come later sometimes. I know that. I know exactly what you're experiencing.
Like, I love this piece about like, make sure that you get to know your patterns, right? Understand where, like, how you got to the point that you got to, right? And this is really rooted in curiosity, not judgment, right? Like, we're not doing this, like, understanding how we got to a binge just to be like, ugh, like, and be super judgy and blamey and shamey. Not helpful. Our eating disorders do that plenty enough. We don't need to add layer. It's really rooted in curiosity. Now, that being said, this practice of checking in with yourself and naming your feelings and understanding how do I feel? How does that translate into the way that I think? How does that translate in the way that I talk to myself? How does that translate in how I show up in life and talk to other people? How does that show up in my body? All of these things, they're going to be super helpful, not just for this. So like, I cannot insist on how this is also going to help you when it comes to like body image work, or, other areas. So like, please know that you're going to like earn extra points for other areas of the work that you're doing. Totally trying to sell this feelings wheel. But also make sure that you practice this checking in with yourself regularly, even outside of patterns, right? We don't have to wait post facts, right? To be like, ooh, let me try to figure out how I was feeling, right? I would really encourage you watching right now. I mean, you too, Meg, if you want, but like to practice this regularly, because one, practice will mean that you actually get better at naming the things, at identifying how you feel and whatnot. But also the point isn't just to be like, ooh, I'm going to figure out like my patterns and that's it. No. The point is when we do that is to start stopping the pattern, like the cycle, right? Earlier and earlier. So once you get in the habit of like checking in with yourself, like in the morning, let's say like, how am I feeling? At noon, how am I feeling now? And like when you go back, I don't know, home from work, from school, from whatever, and you're like, ooh, feeling quite stressed out. Ooh, like now is the time that I can maybe do something about this, right? That's what we mean by emotional like regulation skills and tools. It's that we're trying to do this detective work so that we can break the patterns earlier. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but this is going to be an example we can use later for some of the things that we're going to talk about. But like, you're going to still be human, right? Through this recovery and after this recovery thing. And so being able to do that and show up for yourself is going to be really helpful. We're not talking about like, I'm never going to struggle ever again in life. I'm never going to have to like, use emotional regulation skills. Like you're going to get activated forever.
It's so funny because nowadays, like, because I am so much more connected to my emotions, I am like very good at identifying in the moment what I'm feeling. And it is so true. There will be days I wake up and I'm like, just bleh, and then I'm like, I start to notice it. I wake up and I'm like, today is just one of those days I'm not feeling good. Okay, what am I feeling? Do I know the root of this? If I don't, I'm not going to judge myself for that. It's just like noticing and then being like, what do I need? How can I take care of myself? Is there anything that will bring me out of this state today? And like, sometimes it's just a crap day with crap emotions and it's okay, but it's kind of fun to be able to identify them and take care of yourself in the moment. So,
well, I don't know if I would call it fun, but it's necessary.
Because I feel proud of myself. There's a little bit of me that's like, go me. I can take care of myself today and I know what I'm doing. And like, that's what I mean by like fun in a very like in twisted way. I don't know. It's not.
No, that makes sense.
It's not obviously fun. It's not like dance parties.
Yeah, not really. Not that kind of fun.
So I did want to bring up a little point. It could probably be another tip, but I'm going to loop it into, I'm looping it into number 3.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so tip number 3, we're going to say is work to minimize and eliminate covert behaviors and also recovery sabotaging behaviors. So to name a few, it's like calorie counting, tracking on fitness apps, weighing yourself. Anne-Claire, do you have any that you like to call out?
Oh yeah, like anything that has to do with like food rules, diet, culture rules, body checking, all of those belong there. Basically the ones that aren't sort of like the big behaviors that might be like very obviously like eating disorder behaviors. There are things that other people sort of engage in without that being reflective of having an eating disorder. And they're often quite normalized in society. But for any human in eating disorder recovery, they're like the slipperiest slope ever. So that's sort of like the heading I would give to this category of behaviors.
Yeah, be cautious of the slippery slope because it's really true. Like you can be working on regulating your emotions, feeding yourself. But if you're going to keep stepping on the scale and shaming yourself for the number, that's going to trigger, some sort of response or some sort of emotion because maybe that number's not neutral to you yet. And so it's really important to be protective of yourself throughout this process And I find working with a coach can be really helpful in the covert behavior and overt behavior department as far as setting little goals and how to work to minimize and eliminate these things. But one thing I did think about that we really need to bring up today is it's kind of a covert, perhaps it's actually kind of an overt behavior that we need to shed light on. So when people think about binging, they always talk about the need to stop binging. That's like the title of the video today, essentially. But what we also need to talk about is taking care of ourselves after a binge, if it happens, and recognizing that one of those sneaky behaviors that comes in, if you say you did a huge binge last night and you're feeling like crap, a lot of people just sneak back and say, well, now I have to restrict. So they're restricting the next day, which in their mind, maybe it's like to rebalance out the calorie calculations or something that they've been doing. But at the end of the day, your body still needs food, and you need to teach your body that food is readily available. And you also need to teach your body that it can trust you again. And so feeding yourself the next morning regularly is so important to break the cycle. So you have to take care of yourself. And it's kind of an overt behavior, but it's also kind of sneaky.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically sort of looping back to the start, right? Where we started with like, make sure that you're eating regularly and enough, right? Because when this is what happens, if we binge, then we go back to restriction. All we're doing is pulling that pendulum again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to let go of it, and the pendulum's going to swing again towards a binge. Right. And we're basically feeding that pattern over and over and over again. So when we think of these overt covert behaviors, and I love that you mentioned coaching, because what happens is that when you do that thing that we just talked about, like that detective work and understanding the patterns, what that allows us to do is basically to start pinpointing all of those things from those 3 first tips. Because when we do detective work, we're going to start noticing, when do you eat? When do you not eat? When do you eat enough? When do you not eat enough? What emotions are around? What's going on in your life? What is activating you? What is triggering you? When are you body checking? How are you body checking? You know, all of these, like, how are you judging yourself for how you eat, right? Because mental restriction, again, something that people might not think about. Like when we think restriction, often we think physical restriction, like I'm not eating enough. But if you're judging yourself really harshly for how you eat, your brain is still registering danger, danger. Human is not going to feed me again, right? The same thing as what you just said about like the next day, not like restricting to try to like compensate and negotiate and whatnot. Same impact, right? You're going to keep yourself in this starvation mode, danger, I'm not going to be fed mode. You know, food might not be presented to me anymore because this human is judging, restricting, and then maybe using food in ways that aren't helpful. Yeah.
100%. And I do want to add too, like one of those sneaky behaviors, like those food rules that come in sometimes look like I need to eat the healthiest thing on the menu or the lowest calorie thing on the menu. And what you end up doing there is disowning your right to satisfaction, right? And like your right to choosing something that sounds good. And so I find a big way to also heal here is to be able to ask yourself, what do I really want? What really sounds good? What's going to satisfy me on an emotional level? Not just a physical level, because that's what I found I would experience. I would eat adequately, but I was denying myself the foods that I emotionally wanted. And so I found myself picking at other people's plates, trying to find ways to sneak in the foods that I really wanted when I could have just ordered that myself. Like I'm thinking of like when I really wanted French fries, but I didn't allow myself because it was a sneaky rule. I'd end up binging because I never got that one thing that made me feel mentally satisfied. So there was this need for mental, like I just had this strong mental need that I wasn't listening to. So you have to listen to that.
Amen. Absolutely.
Okay. That was my praise hands and angel clouds.
Yeah. An angelic voice.
Thank you.
It must be the microphone.
Once the mic is up here, I'm like, now is my moment. I can start singing on the Meg Anne-Claire show.
You've got like Mariah, like, little like Madonna, Lady Gaga, like, woo, like, here I am. I have the microphone. I'm going to take up the space.
At one of my jobs, they called me Megaphone McCabe.
Oh, yeah. I remember that story.
Mm-hmm. They called me that because I was the only one at company-wide events who would like to use the megaphone and like bark orders at everyone. That's fun.
I'm not surprised.
I had such a good time. It's also rooted in my lifeguarding past, like no running off the dock. Like I just have this comfort with microphones, megaphones.
Barking at people.
Barking orders at Anne-Claire. I'm just kidding. Kind of.
Meg is like, but I like it.
That's my evil
See,
laugh.
that doesn't work as well for you. The angelic little singy song. You're going to have to perfect that one.
I do need to work on that. It's like Halloween-ish time, so I probably have to work on that.
Yes, you do. We've got one more tip before like closing notes, though.
Do you want to go for it?
So again, we're using like general things that we observe. So, we're just shooting for like the big cognitive distortion that we bump into regularly when we work on binging with clients. And that is all or nothing thinking. So there's like this strong black and white approach to being with food and acting with food, especially when someone is sort of like engaged in that cycle. And then there's this fuck it moment, right? Where it's like, I've already started. I'm just going to like go for it. And then I'll try again tomorrow. The issue is that this is typically the sort of thinking that keeps you stuck longer, disqualifies the fact that you might actually have trained to have tools and whatever, and doesn't really leave enough, like a lot of space for you to act. And it typically takes you back into that pendulum swing and that cycle of like, I had a massive binge. And even though I kind of noticed at the start, because I had already gone for some of it, I just let myself go for the whole thing and then just told myself I will never come back here. And this black and white thinking is typically quite judgy. It's rarely super compassionate and kind. And so for what sounds like probably obvious reasons, just sort of like keeps us stuck, right? Because there's judgment, there's shame, there's blame, all super fun emotions to be with. And then we might be tempted to be like, well, now I have to go like in the opposite direction and swing back to not eating or eating very little or eating only quote unquote healthy foods, etc. So if you can pay attention specifically to where black or white, all or nothing thinking shows up, that might be one of those that creeps in regularly and sort of fuels those patterns.
Yeah, black and white thinking is just an exhausting state to live in because you're constantly starting, stopping, restarting, building momentum, falling back. And so I would say try to live in the gray zone and remember that you can stop a binge at any time. The moment you have awareness of what is happening, it is your responsibility to stop. You do not have to say, well, I've already started, so I'm just going to let it go. It's like, no. Once you have that awareness, call on your healthy self to have some mindfulness in the moment, pause, and do the best you can to stop the binge. You can stop at any time. And I think people forget that.
And stopping can mean different things, right? Like even the concept of stopping. Like I had a binge purge phase years ago. And I remember my therapist being like, oh, but I'm not asking you to just stop. And I was like, ugh, what a loser. It's like, I'm either doing it or not doing it. But she was so right, because what she was suggesting is not only is it more helpful to be like, I'm trying my best so that I'm not extra judgy of myself afterwards. And then it's even heavier to like do the work. But also what it meant to stop could be I stopped for 10 minutes and I journaled and I brain dumped and I texted my coach or I tried to reach out to someone. And maybe that doesn't work, but guess what? You've already paused. You've already proven to yourself that you could do like this for 10 minutes. And maybe the intensity decreased, right? Maybe, the intensity of the binge wasn't as much. And next time, you know that you can at least pause for 10 minutes. Maybe you can do it for 15, right? Like even in the pause, even in the stop, even in the action of, disrupting the cycle, there are, rainbow levels of it, gray levels in your language, right? Like it doesn't have to be either I go for it or I completely stop. And if I didn't stop, then it's a failure, right? Because this all or nothing thinking, I find shows up a lot in terms of, it's like this very perfectionistic kind of thinking. And then because we're so afraid of failing that we're either going full on for I failed, right? Or like, I have to get it right, right? And so this pressure of like either or sort of makes us not even try the in-betweens. So I just wanted to make sure that someone who's hearing this for the first time is like, I don't know how to just stop. Like I might have noticed, but like, it's just too intense. Well, maybe you put an alarm for 5 minutes and you just try to maybe talk to one person or you try to write down your thoughts, and that's already something. And also, by the way, if you write down your thoughts, that's interesting data for you to work on with your therapist or your coach.
Yeah, it's really about practice. Like it's never as simple as just stop. It is about practice and like you said, doing all those tips that you just shared. And I also think a lot of times being able to bring it back to what do I want right now? That sounds good. Because I remember when I went through my binge purge phase, it was a lot of the binges were just me never satisfying my mental need, my actual mental hunger. And then once I started to say, you know what, I'm really like craving an actual bowl of ice cream with like hot fudge and whipped cream on top. And I just gave myself permission to have that instead of graze around the kitchen with like almonds and chocolate chips and like all the things that like I kind of wanted, but I really just wanted the bowl of ice cream. It was massively transformational for me. And that was an example of living in the gray because it's like I allowed myself to eat. And it wasn't like I was just like, oh, I want to binge and I'm not going to. It's like, I'm actually allowing myself to have something delicious in this moment instead of being like, oh, I can't have anything. I have this urge to eat and I can't have it. It's like, no, honoring the need to eat is sometimes very important. Just being wise about what you choose is going to help with the healing process.
I love it.
Okay.
Couldn't agree more.
So I think we should wrap it up because this video is getting kind of long, although we could talk all day, I know. So those are our 4 tips. Eat regularly and adequately. Learn how to identify and feel emotions and then practice all the coping skills attached. Work to minimize and eliminate covert behaviors. And finally, move away from all or nothing thinking. Any gentle reminders or tips, Anne-Claire?
I mean, as always, right? And this is not going to be specific to binging, but make sure that you're caring for all of who you are, right? And that means make sure that in the grand scheme of things, when you look at goals and the little steps and things that you want to sort of like plan and include in your life, you're including in their self-care. You're making sure that your meds are part of the picture if that's applicable to you. Make sure you look at your sleep routine, your movement routine or not, depending on your needs. Make sure that all of your humanity is part of the picture. And please do not forget that seeking help can be an excellent idea. Meg and I did not figure this out on our own, and you deserve to be supported, really.
Well, thank you for those reminders, Anne-Claire, and everybody watching. Thank you for watching. We love you guys. So happy to have you back for season 2. And if you're just joining us, we're so happy that you found us, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Mwah. Bye.